The war came without warning and ended before most even knew it had started. The Arundari Empire had struck Earth's outer colonies with such precision that resistance felt like a forgotten word. Entire settlements vanished under energy blasts that painted the sky in red. Earth's leaders barely had time to react before they were forced to negotiate surrender terms. Humanity had always imagined first contact differently, but what they got was not diplomacy. It was domination. Among the many settlements destroyed, one small research outpost on the moon of Valen was left untouched. The Arundari called it a gesture of mercy. In truth, it was bait a trap for Earth survivors to gather, desperate and weak. When they came, the Arundari captured them without a fight. It was here that Commander Rian Vale's name first echoed across the stars. He had led the survivors to safety before being captured himself, refusing to abandon even a single civilian. That act of defiance caught the attention of someone powerful in the Arundari High Court. She was named Saraya, daughter of House Velari, one of the oldest and most feared noble bloodlines in the galaxy. Her skin glowed like polished emerald under the twin moons of her homeworld. Her eyes held the storm of 1,000 wars, but there was something unreadable in them when she first looked at the human commander. Not disgust, not anger, just study. Rian stood wounded, defiant, and silent as she approached him through the wreckage of his camp. Saraya's guards stepped aside as she raised one finger to his chin and tilted his face up. He did not flinch. Later, Saraya spoke with the Arundari Council. The war had drained their resources. Earth's resistance had cost more than they wanted to admit. Now deals had to be made. Old traditions resurfaced, blood debts, political marriages, and peace through binding. The humans had lost, but not entirely. Saraya requested something unusual. Instead of executing Commander Rian, she demanded him as payment, a living trophy. A husband. The council agreed, though with confusion. Why would a noble warrior of the Velari want a human male as her consort? Saraya offered no answer, only a cold smile. The ceremony was held in silence under the high banner of accord. Rian stood chained in ceremonial armor, too proud to kneel, too tired to protest. Saraya did not wear white. She wore a robe of obsidian silk, embroidered with the fangs of a serpent, symbol of Velari domination. The binding was complete with a drop of blood from each party placed on the altar stone. They told Rian nothing. No explanation, no warning. Just that peace had been achieved, and that his life now belonged to the Lady of Velari. In return, Earth's prisoners would be spared. It wasn't a deal, it was surrender with flowers. He was taken to Saraya's private estate, far from the cities of steel and fire. Her home was carved into the cliffs of Iliara, where waterfalls sang through sharp rock and the skies burned gold during the dusk. It was beautiful, but he was not free. He was a symbol, a tool. Payment for a dead Earth could never repay. Days passed, and Rian spoke little. He walked the gardens like a ghost, while Arundari servants watched him with pity or contempt. Saraya said nothing to him in the early days. She simply watched from the balcony, her expression unreadable. She never smiled, never sneered. Her presence was always calm, like a blade resting before the strike. He often wondered what she saw in him. A curiosity? A test? A punishment to her people? Or something else entirely? One morning, as the mists of dawn clung to the air, Rian found her sitting alone in the Hall of Echoes. It was a quiet chamber filled with light and mirrors, said to reveal one's true self. She was not in armor, not in robes, just a soft white gown, plain and flowing. Her red hair was unbound, and her face was bare of paint. She did not look at him as he entered. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "You walk like a prisoner, but you stand like a king." Rian said nothing. She turned her eyes to his, and something changed, not in her words, not in his stance, But in her gaze, there was a flicker softer than hesitation, warmer than curiosity. For the first time since the war ended, she looked at him not as a weapon, not as a transaction. She looked at him like a person, and in that instant, something deep within Rian stirred. Not trust, not forgiveness, but the first glimmer of understanding. Rian did not sleep well that night. The memory of Soraya's eyes followed him into every shadow and every silence. It wasn't affection or regret in her gaze. It was something slower, something still waking up. It was a look that asked questions, without needing words. He had faced death before, but never a stare that made him feel more alive than terrified. He lay on the bed they had given him, staring at the ceiling until the stars moved out of view. In the morning, the estate was quieter than usual. The guards were present, but less alert. The servants moved carefully, whispering among themselves. One of them left a tray outside Rian's door with hot tea and strange fruit. He took it without speaking. The taste was sharp, like lemon and smoke. He watched the fog outside the window and wondered if Earth still remembered him. Then he heard the soft echo of footsteps behind him. She had come again. Soraya stood in the doorway, dressed not as a noble but in a traveler's cloak. Her red hair was tied back simply, and her eyes held none of the coldness he expected. She said nothing for a moment, just watched him eat. Then she walked past him and opened the window wider, letting the wind fill the room. She looked out toward the cliff's edge, where the waterfalls roared far below. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "Do you miss your home?" Rian didn't answer immediately. His hands tightened on the edge of the table. "Which part?" he asked. "The one they burned or the one they took?" Soraya didn't react. She continued to look out at the sky. "I don't miss mine," she said quietly, "but I remember it." Rian didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Silence became their language. Over the next few days their meetings continued. Always short, always quiet. She would appear without warning, stand beside him in silence, and ask a single question. He would answer, or not. Then she would leave. But something strange began to happen. The guards who once watched him closely began to relax. The servants no longer looked at him like a prisoner. Even the estate's air felt lighter. Rian noticed, but didn't understand why. One evening, Soraya brought him to the training grounds. "Show me how your people fight," she said. Rian blinked. "You already won." She handed him a practice staff and stepped into the circle. "I didn't say fight me," she replied. "I said show me." Rian sighed and took a stance. He moved slowly at first, demonstrating stances and forms passed down through Earth's warrior academies. Soraya watched closely, her eyes sharp, her posture still. Then she stepped forward and mirrored him. She was fast, too fast. Her movements were precise and graceful, like a dancer trained in battle. They sparred lightly at first, then faster. Harder. Sparks flew as the staffs clashed. Rian began to sweat, but Soraya was calm. When the session ended, both stood breathless, facing each other. Rian laughed, surprising himself. "You'd make a fine soldier." Soraya smiled slightly. "You'd make a fine consort." The word hit him harder than the blows they had exchanged. Rian stepped back, unsure how to respond. "Is that what I am?" he asked. "A reward?" Soraya tilted her head. "No, a mistake. One I didn't expect to like." That answer cut deeper than anything she had said before. He wanted to be angry, but he couldn't. Not with the way her voice softened. Not with the way her gaze stayed on him, not judging, but learning. For the first time, Rian felt like the walls around them weren't just stone. They were falling. Later that night, he stood alone on the balcony. The stars were clear, and the twin moons cast silver across the valley. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused from years of war, stained from blood of both friend and enemy. He didn't know who he was anymore. A soldier? A prisoner? A husband by force? Or something new being written between two people who didn't ask for this? Heard the door behind him open, but he didn't turn. He knew it was her. She stepped beside him, silent. Together, they looked out at the night. Neither spoke, neither moved. But something between them shifted again. No longer strangers. Not yet lovers. Just two people who saw war and survived. And now stood close enough to hear each other's heartbeats. Rian began walking the estate more freely. The guards no longer followed him, and the locked doors were now open. He could move through the gardens, the halls, and even the old war archives. No one stopped him, but he knew he was still being watched, not by guards, but by Soraya herself. Wherever he went, she seemed to already know. She allowed his freedom, but within her silent design. One afternoon, Rian entered the Hall of Ancients, a long chamber lined with relics from Arundari history. Spears, shields, armor fragments, and old banners hung on the walls. At the far end stood a statue of Soraya's mother, the former matriarch of House Velari. The figure was carved from dark stone, her expression fierce and unyielding. Rian stood before it for a long time. When he turned, Soraya was already there. She died. In battle, Soraya said. Leading a war she didn't believe in. Rian looked at the statue again. And you? He asked. Do you believe in the war you helped end? Soraya stepped closer. I believe in survival. The Arundari only respect strength. Peace is a fragile thing. You need to make people afraid to break it. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands were clenched behind her back. In the days that followed, Soraya began asking Rian to join her in her duties. He attended meetings with her advisors, sat through military reports, and walked beside her when she inspected her estate's troops. Many Arundari officers gave him cold stares. A few openly mocked him, but Soraya never corrected them. She never spoke in his defense. Instead, she let him defend himself. And Rian did, with silence and a steady gaze. One evening, after a long strategy session, Rian confronted her. You want me to be seen, he said. Not as a symbol, but as a challenge. Soraya raised an eyebrow. Are you afraid of being seen? He shook his head. No, but I'm tired of being useful to someone else's plan. Soraya didn't respond immediately. Then she said, everything in this court is part of a plan, even me. For the first time, Rian saw something in her eyes that looked like exhaustion. That night, Rian sat alone in the garden. The moons were full, casting pale light over the stone paths and glowing flowers. He thought of Earth, of the lives lost, and the silence that followed surrender. He had survived, but what did survival mean when you were no longer free? Then he heard footsteps, light, calm, deliberate. Soraya sat beside him without a word. They sat in silence for a long time. Rian didn't move, neither did she. Finally she asked, if you could leave tomorrow, would you? Rian looked at her. Would you stop me? She didn't answer. He could feel the weight behind her silence. After a pause, she said, no, but if you left, the court would say I failed. And failure is a death sentence here. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. Rian looked down at those hands. For all her power, she was trapped just as much as he was. Perhaps more. Her title was armor, but also a cage. He realized then that she was not the enemy. She was someone born into war, expected to lead, to conquer, to dominate. And somewhere along the way, she forgot how to choose for herself. Just like he had. In the days that followed, something changed between them. Their conversations became longer. Their silence more comfortable. They began to eat together, train together, walk together. The estate's staff began to treat him differently. No longer as a prisoner, no longer as a trophy. Now they bowed to him. And when Soraya walked beside him, she didn't walk ahead. She walked at his side. One morning, Soraya stood at the cliff's edge, the wind pulling her cloak behind her. Rian approached and stood beside her. She said nothing, but her hand reached out and found his. She held it, not as a ruler claiming property, but as a woman holding something fragile. He didn't pull away. He looked at her, and she looked back. No orders, no demands. Just breath and stillness and shared understanding. The estate gates opened for the first time in weeks. A small convoy of armored transports rolled in, bearing the crest of House Elveren. They were old allies of Soraya's family, but loyalty in the Arendari court was a shifting thing. Rian watched from the balcony as the visitors stepped out. Tall and draped in crimson robes. Their eyes were sharp, their movements slow and practiced. These were not warriors. They were power dressed in silk. Soraya met them in the grand chamber. Rian stood beside her, no longer hidden in the background. Lord Calvin Elvaren offered a stiff bow and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "The human consort," he said, voice dripping with amusement. How exotic. Rian didn't react. He had learned the value of silence in rooms filled with snakes. Soraya's expression didn't change either. "He's more than a consort," she replied. "He's a witness to peace." The meeting lasted hours. Talks of trade, resource divisions, and political favors filled the room like smoke. Rian spoke only when asked. But he watched everything. The way Calvin leaned too far forward. The way his guards scanned the room more than necessary. The way Soraya's hand tightened around her cup each time he spoke. There was danger beneath the smiles, and Rian felt it growing with each passing minute. After the guests left, Soraya walked straight to her private chamber. Rian followed, sensing her tension. She pulled off her ceremonial cloak and let it fall. To the floor. "They want war again," she said. "But they don't have the courage to say it aloud." Rian leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Then speak first. Call it what it is." She looked at him, eyes tired but fierce. "If I do, I give them what they want." The next day, an unexpected message arrived. A human envoy representing what remained of Earth's scattered governments had been allowed to visit. It was the first official contact since the surrender. Rian was called to the communication hall. The screen lit up, and a familiar face appeared. General Hannah Morse, his old commander. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice carried weight. "Commander Vale, you've been hard to reach." They spoke for minutes that felt like hours. She asked questions. He answered carefully. She offered updates from Earth cities being rebuilt, new alliances formed, tentative peace with smaller factions. Then came the real reason for the call. "There are whispers," she said, "that you've become close to your captor." Rian didn't flinch. "I was never a captive. I was a price. Now I'm something else." Morse leaned forward. "Be careful what you become, Rian." When the call ended, Rian stood in silence. He stared at the empty screen, unsure of what he felt. Earth remembered him, but not as a man, as a symbol. They wanted him to play a role again, but he didn't know if he fit in their story anymore. The world he left was not the world that remained. And the woman he stood beside now was not his enemy. Not anymore. Soraya entered quietly. She had watched the call from the shadows. "They still think you belong to them," she said. Rian nodded. "And you?" She stepped closer. "I think you belong to yourself." The words were simple, but they struck deep. In a court where every person was owned by duty or blood, the idea of choosing your path was dangerous. And beautiful. That night, Soraya summoned her war council. She placed Rian at her right hand. The advisors murmured, but none dared challenge her openly. She spoke of diplomacy, of warning signs, of Elveren's movements. Then she spoke of trust. "I trust him," she said, gesturing to Rian. "Not because he's mine, but because he stood when others knelt. And because he sees what many of you refuse to see." After the council dispersed, Soraya and Rian remained in the chamber. She sat on the throne, not as a ruler, but as a woman worn by responsibility. He approached her slowly, standing before her without bowing. She looked up at him, eyes searching, unsure for once. "Do you still want to leave?" she asked. Rian thought for a long time. Then he said, "No, but I don't want to be your shield. I want to be your equal." She reached out and took his hand. There were no grand speeches, no declarations. Just two people in a quiet room, finally seeing each other for who they truly were. Not enemies, not tools, but survivors who had chosen to stop surviving and start living. The estate walls echoed with quiet unease. After Soraya's speech in the war chamber, whispers spread across the inner circle. Some saw her bond with Rian as dangerous. Others called it clever, but few understood it. The Arindari did not mix love and power. They arranged partnerships, made deals, built empires from names. But this was different. This was starting to look like choice. Rian walked through the armory alone. The ancient weapons on display had seen wars long before Earth had left its atmosphere, swords that never dulled. Shields built from extinct beasts. He paused before a long lance carved with inscriptions. A servant appeared beside him. "That belonged to the first matriarch," she said. "She led our people out of darkness." Rian nodded slowly. "And where are we now?" She didn't answer. She only bowed and left. Later that day, Soraya invited Rian to the southern cliffs. It was a place few were allowed to visit, guarded by the wind and carved by time. They stood near the edge, overlooking a deep valley filled with blue trees and glowing vines. "This is where my mother swore her final oath," she said, "that no war would ever be fought here again." Rian listened quietly. "Do you believe in oaths?" he asked. "Only when I make them myself." She turned to face him, her expression softer than before. "I was taught never to trust weakness. But when I saw you fight for your people, even after defeat, I realized strength isn't in victory. It's in how you carry the loss." Rian looked down at his hands. Loss never leaves, it just becomes quieter. Soraya placed her hand over his. "Then let it be quiet together." That night, a message arrived bearing Ulverin's crest. They requested a diplomatic visit, urgent and private. Soraya read it in silence, then handed it to Rian. He read it twice. "They're not coming to talk," he said. She nodded. "No, they're coming to test us." Preparations were made quickly. Guards were stationed discreetly. Weapons were placed behind curtains. Soraya dressed in full noble armor, and Rian wore the dark robes of a consort. But this time, he chose them himself. The Ulverin envoy arrived in silence. Calvin stepped out, dressed in white, a color meant for peace but worn here like mockery. His smile was wider than before. "Lady Soraya," he greeted, "and the human prince." Rian remained silent. His eyes didn't leave Calvin's. The hall was filled with courtiers pretending to be calm. But tension grew like fire in dry grass. Calvin spoke of trade, alliances, and futures. But every word had a blade hidden behind it. Then he offered a gift, a sealed box, carved in gold. Soraya hesitated before opening it. Inside was a necklace made of scorched human bones. Rian's jaw tightened. Soraya's face didn't change, but her fingers curled into fists. "A reminder," Calvin said, "of what your pet was before he became a pet." The silence that followed was sharp. Then Soraya stood. "This gift is accepted," she said, "and it will be remembered." When the Ulverin left, Rian found Soraya in the Hall of Fire. She stood alone, the box in her hands. "He meant to shame you," Rian said. But he shamed himself. She didn't speak at first. Then she said, "If I strike now, the council will say I acted out of emotion. If I wait, I risk being seen as weak." Rian stepped forward. "Then don't strike. Let them come again. Let them show their hand. Then crush it. Her eyes met his. There was no fear. Only calculation and trust. "You sound like a ruler," she said. "You sound like someone who belongs here." Rian gave a small smile. "I never asked to belong. But if I must stand, I will stand beside you." She placed the box in the fire without a word. The flames swallowed it without resistance. It was not weakness. It was warning. That night they stood together on the highest tower. No guards, no advisors. Just wind and sky. Soraya leaned against him, not as a queen resting, but as a woman finding peace. Rian wrapped his arm around her, not as a shield, but as a choice. No chains, no roles. Just two people, bound by fate and changed by each other. Asterisk tensions in the court deepened with every passing day. Soraya's enemies began to gather in secret, plotting beneath banners of peace and smiles of loyalty. House Ulverin wasn't alone anymore. Whispers spread like poison about the human consort, about Soraya's choices, about weakness hidden behind affection. The council had not yet moved against her, but the storm was building around them. Rian knew it. He had seen this before on Earth during the fall. Leaders smiling while holding daggers behind their backs. Promises spoken in soft voices meant only to distract. Soraya was strong, but she stood alone among wolves. He spent every night walking the halls, noting the changes. New guards stationed without her command. Servants who refused to meet his eyes. Something was coming. And it was close. One morning, a coded message arrived. It was sent through an old resistance channel, long thought dead. The message was simple coordinates and a date. Rian stared at it for a long time before taking it to Soraya. She read it once, her expression unreadable. "A trap," she said. "Or a cry for help." Rian nodded. "I'll go, alone." Soraya's voice was calm. "No, we go together." They left the estate at night, taking only 2 trusted guards. The journey was long, crossing abandoned sectors and forgotten cities. When they reached the location, they found a hidden camp of survivors, humans and aliens both. Former soldiers, escaped slaves, rebels who had no flag. And among them was a name Rian had not heard in months. General Hannah Morse. She was older, wearier, but her eyes still burned with fire. She greeted Rian with a short nod, then turned to Soraya. "So, the conqueror comes herself." Soraya didn't rise to the insult. "I came to listen." Morse led them through the camp, showing the broken shelters, the wounded children, the stolen tech used for defense. "This is what peace looks like without protection," she said. "Your council plays games while people starve." That night, around a small fire, the 3 of them spoke. Rian told Morse what he had seen. Soraya explained the threats circling the court. And Morse revealed the truth. They had intercepted a message. House Ulverin planned to move against Soraya in 2 weeks. Assassination followed by a false peace treaty with the outer systems. Soraya was not just a target. She was the last barrier before a new war. Rian sat quietly, absorbing every word. Then he spoke. "If they strike, they'll blame it on me. On the outsider, the human who clouded Soraya's mind." Morse nodded. "They're already preparing the story." Soraya stood slowly, her cloak trailing across the dirt. "Then we strike first. But not with weapons. With truth." Morse raised an eyebrow. "Truth doesn't win wars." Soraya looked at Rian. "No, but people do." They returned to the estate before dawn. Soraya summoned her most trusted allies. Messages were sent to every house, every system. She called for a full assembly of the High Court. It was a dangerous move, bold, desperate, but it left no room for whispers. Everything would be spoken aloud, in the light. And in front of everyone, she would show them the truth they had tried to hide. The day of the assembly came. The grand chamber was filled with nobles, warriors, scholars, and spies. The air was thick with tension. Rian stood beside Saraya, wearing the ceremonial armor of her house. He was no longer the chained consort. He was her equal, and the court noticed. Eyes watched him with confusion, curiosity, and quiet fear. Then Saraya stepped forward and began to speak. She spoke of peace built on silence, of loyalty traded for favors, of families who fed war while preaching unity. She named names. She showed records. She exposed plans. And then she turned to Rian. This man was given to me as a symbol of surrender. But he became more. He saw your lies before I did. He stood when I could have fallen, and he will not stand alone. Rian stepped forward. He held nothing in his hands. No weapon, no scroll. Only his voice. I was forced into this court as payment. I accepted it because it saved lives. But I will not remain silent while you turn peace into ashes. I am human. But I have seen more honor in Saraya than in all your hidden councils. And I will stand with her, even if you all stand against us. The room did not explode. It went. Quiet. Too quiet. The silence of impact, not fear. Then one noble stood, then another, and another. Not all, not many. But enough to shake the floor of power. Enough to make House Ulverin pause. The court had been warned. And now it had been changed. After the assembly, the court did not return to normal. The balance had shifted. House Ulverin had been wounded, not by blades, but by truth spoken in a room full of power. Whispers changed direction. Once spoken behind Saraya's back, they now questioned Ulveran's control. Rian's name was no longer a curse, it was a challenge. A reminder that humanity had not been broken. Saraya moved quickly. Those who stood with her during the assembly were invited to the estate. She gave them clear roles, clear orders. Trade networks were reassigned. Defense routes were secured. Old promises were broken without apology. She no longer waited for permission. She acted like a ruler not hoping for survival, but preparing for dominance. Rian took a different role. He visited the houses that had stayed silent. Not as a messenger, but as a question. He sat in front of nobles who had once mocked him and asked what they wanted. Some wanted power, some wanted protection, some wanted peace. Rian listened to each one. And for the first time, many listened back, not to a human, but to a man who had chosen to stand when he could have knelt. One evening, Saraya returned from a war council and found Rian waiting in the garden. The stars were out, the wind was quiet. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a scroll. It held a proposal, a united defense pact between minor houses. Not just a paper agreement, but a full integration of forces. She read it carefully. Then she looked up and smiled. You're not just surviving here. You're building something. He nodded slowly. You gave me space to become something. I won't waste that. Saraya stepped closer. Her fingers brushed his. This thing between us, it was forced by others. But what we make of it now is ours. Rian looked into her eyes. Then let's make it count. There was no need for grand promises. The understanding between them was already stronger than any vow. The following week, House Ulverin made their move. Not through warships or assassins, through the court. A formal accusation was brought against Saraya. Claims of corruption. Claims of emotional compromise. They demanded she step down from her position and surrender her estate. It was politics sharpened into a blade. A blade they hoped she wouldn't see coming. But Saraya was ready. She met the accusation with calm and evidence. Every lie was countered with proof. Every witness they brought was met with one of her own. The court session lasted hours. Rian stood beside her through it all. His presence alone silenced many. They no longer saw a consort. They saw a force built through struggle, not title. The final blow came when Saraya revealed a list of secret transactions made by Ulveran allies. Hidden trade deals, stolen tech. Slave transfers masked as diplomacy. The court shifted again. Gasps turned to silence. Ulveron's mask cracked. Calvin rose to speak, but the room no longer listened. The Empress herself, watching from above, made her judgment. House Ulveron will be investigated. Until then, Lady Saraya retains full authority. Outside the chamber, the estate guards raised the Velari crest higher. Nobles who once doubted her now sent messages of alliance. Her enemies retreated to their shadows, quieter and cautious. The threat was not gone, but the tide had changed. And Saraya had done it without war, with truth, with alliances, with a human who stood where no one expected him to stand. That night, a celebration was held in the lower halls. Not grand, not royal, just her people, her soldiers, her staff. Rian walked among them, speaking, laughing, sharing food. Saraya watched from a distance before joining him. For once, there were no titles, no burdens, just presence, just breath, and belonging. As the music faded, Rian and Saraya stood alone in the garden once more. She turned to him and asked quietly, "Do you regret it, staying here?" He didn't speak right away. Then he looked at her with steady eyes. "No, because I've never stood for something stronger than this. Stronger than us." Asterisk. The sun rose over the cliffs of the estate, casting golden light on the banners of House Velari. The colors danced in the wind, no longer symbols of fear, but of strength earned through defiance. Rian stood on the balcony, overlooking the valley, his eyes steady. The world had changed, but the fight for peace was not over. It had only just begun. Saraya joined him in silence. She wore no armor today, only a soft gray robe and a thin silver chain around her neck. Her gaze was calm, but her shoulders carried the weight of her house, her decisions, and the new alliances being built. She leaned against the railing, her arm brushing his. "The Empress has called for a summit," she said, "and she wants us both present." Rian looked at her with a slight nod. Then she finally sees Earth as more than a ruin. Saraya gave a soft breath of agreement. "She sees it because of you." There was no pride in her voice, only truth. Rian had arrived as a captive. He had remained by choice. And now, his presence had shifted more than just a court. It had changed a system built on control. The summit was to be held on the High Star Station, a place where history had often been rewritten. The journey there was quiet, with Saraya and Rian traveling aboard her private vessel. During the flight, they reviewed reports from Earth and other allied planets. Trade was growing. Refugees were being resettled. And across the stars, a new idea was forming. One of shared survival instead of conquest. The station was enormous, floating above a gas giant that painted the sky with orange and green. Inside the central chamber, the Empress waited, along with leaders from 20 systems. Humans were present too, standing alongside old rivals. Rian's entrance caused a stir, but not the kind it once would have. Now he was greeted with nods of respect. No chains, no shame, just recognition. The Empress stood and addressed the chamber. "The war cost us much," she said, "but in the ashes we found voices we had long ignored. The voice of Earth, the voice of choice, the voice of those who chose peace even when they were given chains." She gestured to Saraya and Rian. These two turned a symbol of defeat into a foundation of alliance. Then came the real purpose of the gathering. A new council was proposed, one made not by bloodlines or old laws, but by agreement. Every system would have a voice. Even Earth. Saraya was asked to oversee its formation. And she asked for Rian to lead the Commission for Integration. Some questioned it, but none dared oppose it openly. The old ways were cracking, and new ones were rising. Later that evening, Rian stood in a quiet observation deck, looking out at the swirling clouds below the station. Saraya joined him, silent for a moment. Then she asked, When this began, did you ever think it would end like this? Rian smiled faintly. No, I thought I would die in a cell, or be forgotten. She reached for his hand and held it tightly. You were never just a debt. And I was never just a captor. They stayed there until the stars brightened. Around them, the future was taking shape. Documents were signed, borders redrawn. Trust, once a rare currency, was beginning to grow. Rian spoke with human envoys, many of whom had once believed he'd betrayed them. But when they saw how he stood beside Soraya, they understood. He had not been broken. He had helped build something stronger than fear. When the summit ended, Soraya and Rian returned to the estate. This time, they were not met with silence or suspicion. They were met with cheers. People bowed not out of fear, but respect. Rian no longer felt like a visitor. He was home, not by blood, not by conquest, but by choice. And so was she. In the quiet of the evening, they walked through the garden once more. The wind was gentle. The flowers glowed softly in the moonlight. Rian looked at Soraya and said, "They once said your eyes were cold." She turned to him, her voice low. "And now," he smiled, "now they look like hope."